Hi. Good evening. Welcome to Bourbon Talk. Um, Spring has sprung in the blue state of Georgia, and my neighbors, who are college students because I live in a college town, are listening to a rocking brass cover of Sexual Healing. So this might be an interesting bourbon talk. Cheers. I have no idea what's going on. Meanwhile, my cat Dixie, who likes being outside, she is just like so happy looking at this whole thing. She is enjoying the show. So we have one happy audience member. Oh, and they're singing. Oh, they're singing Sexual Healing. Gotta love it. Gotta love it. It's good to see everybody. Happy to be here tonight. I was champing at the bit a little bit to get on here tonight. I had a really interesting day of research today. So I've been pretty pumped about what I found and what came across the wire and sort of the inroads I've been making in the book. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the book here in a little bit. I'm currently at the end of the 18th century, so I am right around the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution. And the stuff that I am finding is mind-blowing, like crazy relevant shit. So I've been excited about that all day and getting on here. And it's always nice to come back after a week off from a week off of Bourbon Talk. I always feel rejuvenated, ready to go when we're getting ready to do this. The problem is, unfortunately, we got to talk about some deeper shit. As I talked about on the podcast this week, and I wrote about on the blog, Tucker Carlson is going for it. Like he's like, you know what? I'm going to leave the gravity of good taste behind. I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to be who I want to be. I want to shoot my shot. And my shot is white supremacist fascism, which is an incredible thing to watch play out in real time. In a couple of weeks, Tucker Carlson has advocated the embrace of fascism, open embrace, and saying that the Democrats are going to make the Republicans elect a fascist. And he's just like, yeah, that's right. As his guest said that. It was like this really interesting moment to see Tucker like react to it. And it was obvious that it was obviously a moment for him where he's like, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, we are going towards fascism. And maybe I'll be the fascist. Maybe I'll be the guy. Maybe I'll go ahead and be the guy. And then, of course, he spends a segment of his show completely laundering the January 6th Capitol coup and says, you know, there was nothing wrong with it. The media wants you to believe that this was some sort of a terrible action or that this was some sort of untoward behavior or something to be condemned. And Tucker's like, no, that's our house. And that's not what happened at all. Completely just bulldozed over a coup attempt that killed people. He even said at one point, I don't know if you all saw this, but he was like, we actually had a young woman who died and no one can tell me why that happened. She was breaking through a barrier at the Capitol. Incredible. Just an absolute incredible thing. And then, of course, he comes out and does like this little guest spot because Fox News is all in on Tucker. Fox News sees Tucker as their future. He is their cash cow right now. And as they are losing ratings, they're like, there's only one thing that we can do, and that is put more Tucker Carlson on Fox News. They're not afraid of this thing. They're not terrified of it all. The last time that we actually saw this was Glenn Beck back in 2010. Glenn Beck back in 2010, who, of course, was pushing the ideas of the New World Order. He was the ratings cow for Fox News. And so they were just like, oh, it's not enough that Glenn Beck has an hour-long show every night or that he makes like 2 or 3 appearances on the O'Reilly Factor. But they started bringing him on earlier in the day in order to juice the daytime ratings. That's what they're doing with Tucker Carlson right now. They know what he's talking about. When he's talking about white replacement, when he's talking about embracing fascism, it's not like they're not watching this stuff. They're betting on it. They're betting on it, which is insanity. And so what we are actually watching with Tucker Carlson is that Tucker Carlson right now is starting to normalize a fascistic movement on the right. And we all know that they're already there. They're already advocating. They stood by the kid in Wisconsin who killed a couple of people. They've stood by people who have been running over protesters. They've used violent rhetoric. They've embraced wholeheartedly people who continually use violent rhetoric. Their main campaign tactic at this point is to mimic the shooting and assassination of people. They have already started to embrace this thing. He is pushing it into the next act. And the next act is the actual practice of accepted open fascism. And this is the thing. We've talked about this on the Muckrake podcast over and over and over. What they are saying as of right now, the message that is being conveyed, the message is, if you don't give in to us, if you don't stop pushing multiculturalism, if you don't stop pushing pluralism, if you don't allow us to rig democratic institutions, if you don't allow us to disenfranchise, if you don't allow the stranglehold of white corporate patriarchal supremacy, unvarnished access to American power, we will start shooting. And we've already started shooting, but we'll start shooting more. That is the message that's being conveyed right now. And here's the thing, like, there's a lot of you, and obviously I've gotten to know some of you, and I've seen some of you around on these things. This isn't anything that like I haven't been talking about, Kinzier hasn't been talking about, Snyder hasn't been talking about. All of this stuff has been glaringly obvious. And meanwhile, and somebody asked about this in the questions, meanwhile, people are like, oh, stop throwing around the F word, fascism. Oh my God. Have you no shame? What a grifter you are to talk about fascism. They're not hiding this shit at all. Tucker Carlson is profiting off of this. Fox News is profiting off of this. The Republican Party has no other moves beyond going into this. They have no actual ideology. It's just the protection of white supremacist corporate capital. That's it. That's it. And it's all right there. None of this has been hidden. None of this has even been particularly camouflaged. None of this has even really been telegraphed, to be honest. Yeah, Trump derangement syndrome. That was a fun thing for a while. And now, by the way, and again, we have more questions about this today. People are like, well, was Trump really that bad? Or was he really that dangerous? And you know what? Was January 6th really that bad? Like, I know it felt really bad. And yeah, it's not great when people overrun the Capitol and threaten to kill the Vice President of the United States of America and leadership from both parties. But was it really that bad? And those people continue to enable this thing. And they do it because they want to protect their brand. They don't want to get made fun of on social media. They don't want to be called hysterical. They don't want to be called, reactionaries or whatever in the hell they're making up now. It's so gross. I don't know about you. I've been on this beat. I've been on this beat now for a few years, and it has gotten to the point. And this is something I wanted to talk about tonight. It has gotten to the point where I know what's real. I know what I'm seeing. I know what I've recognized, just like you do. You know that these people are full of shit or delusional or scared. They're probably scared. I mean, my God, it's a scary time. If you really want to wrap your head around where we are and what's going on, and not only where the right is, but where the modern moment of politics is, it's pretty scary. It is. And some people want to live in denial of it because it's too scary to deal with. because they don't actually want to look around and see where things are, or what the score is, or where we've been and where we're going. I mean, that's a really, really frightening thing. And on one hand, you have to keep ringing the alarm, and you have to keep talking to people, and you have to keep letting people know what's going on. These are important things. You have to let the people you know and the people you care about and the people around you know what's actually going on, and tell them the truth about this stuff, and engage in solidarity and conversation and come together for this thing. Because if we don't, I mean, you might as well shut down the store and be done. But we also have to stop worrying about the people who want to live in denial of it. You can't make people see something that they don't want to see. And that's a really frightening part of it. You can convince some people by talking to them, or, giving them facts, but people who are making money off of being delusional about this, people who their entire lives and stations and careers and relationships, those people, I don't know what there is to do with them. And, on one hand, I think for our own mental health, for our own well being, and for the purposes of having an objective reality, which is absolutely necessary with rising fascism and authoritarianism, you kind of got to say, hey, best of luck. I hope I see you on the other side. And that's a hard thing. That's a really, really hard thing. And social media makes us feel like somehow or another we have to win all these arguments and convince all these people, almost like we have to be evangelical about it. We have to take care of ourselves and the people around us. We have to spread information to as many people as we can. But, it's like you're not going to reach Chuck Todd. You're not going to reach Matty Iglesias. I mean, he's too busy thinking we need 1 billion Americans. Like, it's not going to happen. We have to deal with one another. We have to communicate. We have to engage in solidarity. We have to be there for each other, mutual aid, all of it. But we're not going to convince all of these different types of people. We have to take care of our own stuff. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to make ourselves better. We have to prepare ourselves. We have to organize. We have to build communities. We have to rely on one another and find people that we can trust and bridge the relationships that we possibly can. Yeah, because heroes aren't going to save us. I'm sorry, the Avengers aren't real life. And the memes about, this Democrat or that Democrat or whatever is going to save us. It's not going to happen. There's not going to be a billionaire who saves us. There's not going to be one individual who does it. We have to save ourselves. And I'm with you. I'm frustrated with so much of it, but we got to take care of the things that we can take care of. And when it comes to stuff like Tucker Carlson, listen, we've seen this. We've seen it coming. We've talked about this. We've gone through this. We've documented it. We've talked about it. We've analyzed it. We are trying to tell everybody that we possibly can what's going on. And that's all we can do. And we have to stop looking for messiahs. I completely agree. We are the change that we want to be. Yeah, I'm concerned about this Chauvin trial too. I really, really am. Yeah, we have to build something better. We absolutely do. We have to create some sort of a parallel structure that is better than all of this. But we have to change the way we think it and the way that we approach it. It's like, I don't know about the rest of you. When Tucker said that, when Tucker came out and embraced white supremacist replacement theory, I wasn't surprised. I mean, he's had white supremacist neo-Nazis in his writing room bringing that information straight to TV. And I knew that was I knew that's who he was, and he does it every night. He does it every night. Tucker Carlson's an extremely talented individual. He has an incredible ability to know where the winds are. And by the way, for those who don't know it, Tucker Carlson has been on all 3 major cable news networks because he was able to put his finger up in the air and understand where the wind was going. He's incredibly dangerous, and he's incredibly talented. And he is the ideal candidate to take the torch from Trump and become the more competent, more talented, more ideological demagogue. He has every ability to take that torch and run. And meanwhile, people who should know better, they're watching and they're like, yeah, that sounded a lot like replacement theory. It was replacement theory. Like we talked about on the Muckrake podcast, it was more or less the 14 words. First question on this note, Rich H. Rand says, if people like Tucker Carlson are laying the groundwork for fascism by saying it's the only way to maintain power, how might that progress? What are potential red flags? We just saw a red flag. And I will say really, really quickly, and this is important. We have to personally understand when we see a red flag. Like, we have been gaslit and misled for years, pretty much our entire lives. We have spent so much time, and this is one of the reasons why I do these bourbon talks. One of the reasons why I keep talking about like the Muckrake community, why I keep talking about like getting to know one another, and that way we can start to talk to one another. And that way we can start to say, hey, by the way, you're right. Like, you actually did see what just happened. Like you're not nuts. I understand that the media is telling you that that's not what's going on. I understand that, like these politicians who are afraid to like ring the alarm, like I know what they're saying, but you actually did just experience that. And again, like when you are being told that like, oh no, you can't believe your lying eyes. You can't believe your ears. You can't believe the things you've seen and the things that you've heard. That takes a toll. And part of authoritarianism, part of fascism is troubling truth so much that people end up just not being able to tell the difference anymore. And they're so afraid that they're like, go ahead, march through the streets, Sieg Heil and carry torches and destroy buildings. I don't know what to do. Just please leave me alone. They want you to feel like you are nuts and alone. You have to find people who will be there and they will be like, hey, seriously, what you are feeling right now is valid and real. That's an important thing. And these red flags, I mean, we just had 3 of them with Tucker Carlson. And that's not an accident. He's ratcheting this thing up. And I talked about this, I want to say a couple of weeks ago. Biden had a couple of victories. And immediately they started turning up the heat. And they were escalating and escalating and escalating it. And then, it's like, this is a reaction to it. It's a reaction to feeling like they're losing power. And by the way, like if they move beyond the filibuster, oh my God, it's going to get crazy. It's going to get really, really crazy. So, when they start imagining violence, because this is something that we're probably going to see here before too long, when they start theorizing about what that violence would look like wouldn't it be terrible if X suddenly got hurt or got killed, or if this keeps happening, this could happen. This is one of the things that happened before Oklahoma City. They were like, oh, we're this close to a civil war. Rush Limbaugh was out there saying that. They laid the groundwork for it with stochastic terrorism. And when you see that, that's going to be something. Then we're going to have more instances of violence in which they're going to say, and tell me if this sounds familiar, they're either going to say, yeah, that was a legitimate piece of violence, which they did, of course, in Wisconsin. Or they'll say something along the lines of, tell me if this sounds familiar, yeah, I don't actually think that was like right-wing people. I think that was left-wing people pretending to do that. It was false flag. We're going to see more of that. And, the only thing we can do is have communities and be there for each other and reassure each other that our senses aren't lying to us and that we know what reality is. That's the only thing we can do. And we push back where we can. We apply pressure where we can. We try and get people who are either reporters or politicians, people who have the beginnings of a grasp on this thing. We try and let them know what's going on, and we put pressure on them, while meanwhile we're creating our own communal bonds and our own grassroots movements. Those are the only things we can do. But that's what Tucker is starting, 100%. And, I talked about this in the blog that I wrote this week. If you didn't see, it's on my Substack. Like, this is the beginnings of fascism. And America really, really, really is susceptible to fascistic appeals. We've been there and we loved it. We had massive, massive, massive fascistic movements in this country. Yeah, that's exactly right. They characterized McVeigh as a lone wolf, but it wasn't. He was part of a massive movement and conspiracy. Stevie Kubrick, how successful do you think Tucker will be in peeling off fans of leftists like Jimmy Dore and Glenn Greenwald and converting them to his brand of right-wing faux populism? So this is one of the things that ends up happening. So as our political structure starts to fall apart. Oh, I'll talk about threats in a second here, Katie. Thank you for asking about that. That's really cool of you to ask. Um, so one of the things that ends up happening is as the political structure starts to fall apart. And do not get me wrong, that's exactly what's happening. We are losing political power. We are losing leverage and democratic power because corporations have bought and sold this government. And meanwhile, the Republican Party, which is a frontward PR face of corporations, is working to disenfranchise us and is using the minoritarian government and its features, such as the Electoral College and the Senate, to their advantage. As we lose more power, people on the left will either become radicalized and move further left, or they'll start to form coalitions with people on the right. One of the really dangerous things about Tucker Carlson is he has an incredible understanding of faux populism, which means that he'll be able to use fascistic appeals while also continuing to use these populistic appeals that like Trump was able to use, which is saying, "Oh, these poor people over here. You're being exploited. I'll tell you who's exploiting you." Them. Tucker understands that language. He's really, really good at using it. And so people like Dore and people like Greenwald, and they're not even necessarily about being leftist. They're more about wielding power. You'll notice that like if somebody doesn't work with them or somebody doesn't appreciate them or bend down and kiss their boots or just automatically go along with their mindset, they reject them and attack them. They're not actually on the left. They're not actually interested in building coalitions. They're interested in power. And I'll tell you what, Tucker Carlson and people like Tucker Carlson are going to be incredible conduits to power. So yeah, they'll peel off some of those. We see this. We see that supposed leftists end up working with fascists. This is something that we've seen over and over and over again. Mark Sauke, what's your take on how definitely news organizations, quotes around it, like Fox News, use easy to repeat rhetoric to perpetuate propaganda while maintaining plausible deniability? It's like this. So I was talking with somebody about this the other day about a possible project about the New World Order conspiracy theory. And one of the things you need to understand is that Fox News has used a laundered, easily sold, sort of dialed down New World Order conspiracy theory the entire time. They're 24 hours a day of the New World Order conspiracy theory. So they've pushed that. They've gotten people killed. Like Fox News has gotten people killed. On top of that, they have laundered corporate libertarian hyper-capitalistic propaganda time and time again. And they've done it by putting it behind racist paranoia. White supremacist paranoia and white supremacist dog whistles are the only thing that they've been doing for forever. That's their entire profit motive. And they'll continue to do it. And right now, and I've talked about this in the past, um, they have to compete with Newsmax and OANN and God knows how many other like independent news organizations and people. They have to go further right. And they have to perpetually go further right. No matter how much they try and control their base, they have to keep going right. And that's what Fox News is doing right now. But they hide this. They hide behind free speech and the idea that they're a news network and, fair and balanced. Meanwhile, they're doing nothing but amplifying white supremacist, dangerous fascistic rhetoric. It's true. Harley asked, "What's it like to be harassed?" That has to suck, right? It does. It does suck. Unfortunately, that's sort of part and parcel for covering politics and talking about politics. Yeah, it sounds like New York City. Tonight is a loud night in the borough, for sure. Unfortunately, to cover politics in the 21st century in the United States of America means that you get harassed and you get death threats. It's a weird thing that I have been dealing with for the past few years. It happened completely out of nowhere when I went viral covering Trump rallies and sneaking into them. And I started having a bunch of people showing up at my house and trying to break in and, like sending me pictures of my house and stalking me at work and just showing up on random days or in the middle of the night. It still happens. I dealt with a shit ton of harassment this week. And it's weird. It was like I had two things that I talked about. I talked about the Second Amendment being a side effect of white supremacist paranoia and slaveholding, which it absolutely is. Those are the origins of the Second Amendment. And you can bet that I had a bunch of people attacking me about my opinion on the Second Amendment. I don't know what happened. I assume some far right individual or outlet covered it because you can always sort of tell when that gets turned on, and you kind of know that like you've hit a nerve. And so I was like, okay, here we go, 24 hours of this. And then in my writing about the Tucker Carlson replacement theory thing, I tweeted about this. Um, it was a bunch of people who were like, I'm not racist, but it's also not racist to care about protecting the white race. And how dare you say we would hurt people, but I'll kill you for that. And it's a bunch of people who are in real denial about who they are. And they are, they're rough. But yeah, so it sucks. I hate the harassment. It really, really blows. And it's like one of those things where like, the shit that I've gone through just like covering this stuff, um, like I just got used to it at some point, and like I kind of forgot that it's like traumatizing and terrible. You know what I mean? Like I actually had a moment the other day where I was like, man, my life has not been normal for a very long time. And I just kind of sat with that for a while, and I was like, I had to remind myself that it's not okay, that this isn't right, that like the United States of America that people talk about and praise all the time, that shouldn't be a part of it. But of course it is, and it always has been. That's what this country does, is if you speak out or if you fight against the systems of power, you end up being targeted. And that's part and parcel. So it sucks. Thank you for asking. I really appreciate people asking about that. That's really nice of you. Mike, I've been thinking about your Amazon article for like a fucking week now. Me too. What are the modern corporations? What's it mean to be living in a post-nation reality? So I wrote this thing called A Nation Unto Themselves. And basically it was about how Amazon and corporations like it have grown beyond what we used to think about corporations. We used to think that it was, people involved in a business who sold a product and, made a profit or whatever. It's grown beyond that because of what has happened in the past 40 years in America, particularly what happened in the 1970s and then with the Reagan Revolution. And then, since then, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. This era of hypercapitalism was a redistribution project. And by the way, whenever you hear on Fox News, they're like, oh, redistribution of wealth. Well, what they did was they redistributed it from us up. They took the 99% of Americans and then shoved their money up to the top, which created, millionaires and billionaires, and possibly we're going to be looking at trillionaires. So over time, what ends up happening, and by the way, I'll give you a little bit of history behind this. Capitalism as a system, even the most ardent capitalists, when this thing like came online, I'm talking about like Adam Smith with Wealth of Nations. When he was writing about it in 1776, he was like, oh, capitalism is going to be this really good force. And, everyone will be served based on people following their own self-interest. But even he was like, oh, don't worry, it won't get out of hand because unions and guilds will be there to negotiate, profit sharing and wages. And, it'd be really, really dangerous if like a group of people, I believe he called them a faction. It would be really dangerous if a faction were to take over a sector and just sort of like start to cannibalize it, which is something that people don't understand about Adam Smith, is he was warning people about this back in 1776, and he was like the original like capitalist guy. Well, they were given the keys to the store because that's what happens in capitalism. You can put safeguards on it, but eventually you'll reach that ceiling, right? The government will put a regulator on it, and all the corporations want to do is break through that ceiling because that's their entire purpose, is to continually increase their power and their profit. So they've broken through that ceiling, and that ceiling is non-existent now, which means that the corporations, which were started as an extension of the state, right? Corporations were originally how empire was carried out. A kingdom or a nation wanted to go across the ocean and deal with its colonies and exploit the people and engage in slavery. The corporation would do what the country couldn't do because the nation had boundaries. They could send their armies and their navies that way, but they needed business people to go and carry out slavery and exploitation. Well, originally it was an arm of the nations. Well, what ends up happening, and I'm so glad Brittany said the British East India Company, because the British East India Company is a perfect example of what ends up happening. The corporation, as it's making money off the exploitation of people, it grows and grows and grows. The East India Company started its own army and its own navy to the point where they were one of the biggest superpowers in the world. They were effectively their own nation state. They could declare war, they could enslave people, they could exploit people. Eventually, they came to rival Britain. What has happened right now is that our corporations have grown beyond us. They have turned into nation states unto themselves. But here's the problem. One, the internet and free trade has made it where they don't have to deal with borders anymore. They can be sort of like floating bodies floating over the sky. They don't have to pay taxes, right? Like they can get around taxes. They can move their office over here to an island or something. Or, oh, you're going to raise taxes on us? Well, we'll go over here. So they don't have to actually chip in on roads and schools and healthcare and all that shit. So meanwhile, they have also started feeding on the nation state. This is why these companies barely pay their employees anything, because the nation state needs them for the economy. And so the nation state's like, well, don't worry about paying for that. We'll go ahead and we'll take care of the welfare for those people. Even though you're not paying us taxes, we'll give them welfare. We'll give them social services. We'll make sure that they are getting their needs met, which is one of the reasons why we have things like Obamacare, right? So eventually the state ends up becoming a host for the corporation that eats off of them. And here's the thing. While this is happening, they are starting to take over our political process. They are basically buying and selling politicians on both sides of the aisle, by the way. The Democrats and the Republicans are both getting money from these corporations. Do not get this wrong. This is an important thing that we have to understand. They pay everybody. They just give everybody money. Then, meanwhile, those corporations are starting to take over privatized public functions. They end up taking care of like logistics. They end up taking over like the computer networks. They end up even working with like the Defense Department. It's going to get to the point, and this is important too. It's going to get to the point where they're going to take over things like law enforcement. In fact, the beginnings of law enforcement were private people and businesses paying people to protect their property. I just learned, I was just reading about this in my research. Like, that was the original policing. And they were like, why would we want to pay for the country? And then the country is like, oh, we'll have a revolution if we don't end up suppressing people all around the country. And they're like, okay, well, you can have some taxes for law enforcement, which is one of the reasons why law enforcement is one of the only things that actually gets funded. So they want to make sure that there aren't uprisings and revolutions. It's dangerous. It's a really dangerous thing. So what I was saying in the article, and this is an important thing to walk away with, While you and I are talking about national politics, while you and I are talking about the United States of America, corporations don't think about the United States of America. They don't think about waving a flag and bald eagles and fireworks and all that shit. They think about international systems, right? They're like, well, let the little people think about nationalism. Let the little people think about countries. They're thinking about international systems. They're a step ahead of us, and they want us behind them. They want us thinking about what's going to happen in the next election and what do we think is going to happen in the Senate. Meanwhile, the Senate and the elections become less and less important because the government doesn't matter as much anymore. And by the way, at some point, like they just want to go to Mars, where they don't have to pay minimum wage, but they don't have to do anything. And by the way, the entire point, real fast, one of the things that ended up happening, all these free trade deals were gifts to these corporations, which said, we understand you don't want to pay our workers minimum wage, you don't want to give them benefits. Well, go ahead and send your factory elsewhere where you can exploit people and not pay them a minimum wage, not give them benefits, and then go ahead and send the stuff back to us and our people will buy it. And there was a deal that was made, and the argument was, well, we'll go ahead and turn America more into both a service, but also an intelligence and a creative sort of a bastion, right? And we'll raise everybody up into the middle class, and we'll basically become a consumerist society. Well, guess what? We're a consumerist society, but now we're a service society. The only thing that we're making money doing is delivering food to the people who run these giant corporations. Gig economies where they don't have to take care of benefits at all, and we can work more than 40 hours a week, more than 8 hours a day, whatever. It's an insidious thing. It really, truly, truly is. So anyway, yeah, I wrote about that. If you want to read more about it, I wrote about that. The article, "Nations Unto Themselves." It's a really insidious thing. Hecatron, are you surprised there hasn't been more political violence since January 6th? I thought we would have seen more state-level action. And the last part, is this an effect of us still largely unable to congregate? I think so. I think that's exactly right. No, I didn't think we would have violence or a terrorist attack by now. I think that's building. And I think one of the things that's happening is that the people that were emboldened by Trump, because one of the things that Trump did was it made it okay for people to go and join this stuff and to sort of become more and more radicalized via like social media and stuff like that. They've got more recruits than ever. They've got more manpower than ever. They're communicating with international right-wing neo-fascistic groups. It is gestating right now, and it is growing right now. I think there is a real possibility that we're going to see something in the next year and a half. If it's not taken down, maybe it'll be taken down. Maybe it'll be squandered, and maybe material conditions will be taken care of, and radicalization will go down. I knock on wood, but I'm worried about it. I'm really, really worried about it. So no, I didn't think it would be by April or anything, but yeah, we're still in plenty of danger. Hey, it's good to see everybody, by the way. Been really, really good to see everybody. Love doing this. Little focus on the best part of HR 1, which is an end to gerrymandering. Nobody wants to talk about gerrymandering. And in fact, there's sort of something to it where nobody really wants to come out and have a conversation about gerrymandering, because gerrymandering is one of those spoils systems where if you win and take over, like, you can go ahead and do the gerrymandering yourself. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be the exact same thing. I don't think the left would carry it out to the extent that the right does. But yeah, it's just not a sexy thing to talk about on the news. It's really hard to explain. And also, when you start having a conversation about gerrymandering, it kind of gives the message to people listening and watching, hey, by the way, this whole thing's rigged. And you do not want to have that conversation. You do not want to talk to people about the fact that our process is rigged, or that our process is being manipulated, or that it can be easily manipulated. That's why whenever you see coverage of long lines, right, at the election, they're like, oh, these lines are very long. We need to do something about that. I think that we need more polling places. And you'll notice, right, what I just said. That's not a controversial thing, right? Like, of course, yeah, it's like lines at a Walmart when you go in and it's like the lines are backed up. It's like, why don't we open up another line? That is a different conversation than saying, oh, one of the major parties in the country is actively and aggressively disenfranchising, particularly people of color. Because then all of a sudden, what do? You have to have a conversation about white supremacy and the history of disenfranchisement of people of color. That's a lot. That's a lot. It's really a hard thing to have a conversation about. My shirt. This is a band shirt for a band called Godspeed You Black Emperor. They're good. Never seen them. I have to say, growing up an evangelical, particularly like a cultish, apocalyptic evangelical, I love this shirt, but it was so like there was a part of me that was like, Jared, do you really want to buy a shirt with an all-seeing eye on it? That feels like you're messing with forces. It's funny how those frameworks stay with you. Even if you escape it, even if you leave it, even if you don't practice, even if you understand what apocalypticism is about, there's still that framework in there. It was really, really odd. Anyway, Randy, The Rock is thinking about running for president. Say it ain't so. It certainly is so. I told people on here, I think it was on here, not the podcast. The Rock has a show on NBC, and the show on NBC is called Young Rock. And the frame of the show is that in the future, The Rock is running for the presidency, but he's having a retrospective and he's introducing himself and sort of laundering his past life to the audience. I knew almost immediately when I saw this that this was the beginnings of some sort of a PR project and that he had been thinking about running for the presidency. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. And our culture of celebrity is so absurd. And if you actually go and you look at interviews with The Rock about politics, he doesn't know at all what he's talking about. He has no clue. He obviously has a high public recognizable factor to him. But we need to move away from this. American culture is in real trouble. It is just in total trouble. And like Donald Trump getting elected president and you know creating a cult of power and personality was obviously a low point in American culture. But I'm telling you, this stuff is really, really potent. Potent. Our culture is bankrupt. It really, truly is. It's bankrupt. And we have gotten to the point where Americans are more interested in distraction and they're more interested in escape than they are like things of substance. And there's a reason why. I mean, we have to have empathy in this moment and understand why people are so interested in escapism and entertainment. It's because material conditions on the ground suck. It's one of the reasons why people have trouble with substance abuse issues. It sucks to hurt. It sucks to struggle. And one of the problems in this country is a lot of people have lost hope because of what I was just talking about. Power has been drained systematically, cruelly, and inhumanly by corporations and the powerful and the wealthy. They've created a situation where it's a lot better to just zone out than to pay attention. It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal, and it makes me it makes me cringe and just it makes me so frustrated and so mad. But absolutely, yeah, this thing with The Rock, it's embarrassing. It's absolutely embarrassing, and it's all about this culture of spectacle and symbolism that we're currently living in. It's rough. Julia, it might be too late. It was not. But if you read it, can you talk about that AP article, Pence yelling clear the Capitol? They were leaving him to get murdered. Listen, it's not funny because I don't want anybody to actually die. I don't ever wish for someone to die, and you know it's awful. I'm sure there's trauma left over from it. I hope the people who were involved in the Capitol coup are getting help and going to therapy and talking to people about it. Um, Mike Pence was left to die at the Capitol. We just have to. I just want to put that out there. Mike Pence was left to die at the Capitol, and there are many reasons why that had happened. I think the best explanation for what happened at the Capitol is a multi-level explanation. I think there were a lot of different reasons why a lot of different people were doing it and why a lot of different people were there. I also think that listen, I don't think that Trump was even necessarily in on a conspiracy. I think people told him to go a certain place and people were going to cheer for him and they put something in front of him and he said what they told him to say. And then he was like, "Oh, I love it. Look what these people are doing. They're there to help me." Meanwhile, there were people around him and people in the government who were leaving Mike Pence to die. Whew. God, that's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And by the way, every day, every single day, we find out new stuff from this Capitol situation that should pause everything. The entire country should be like, this is a terrible situation that just occurred. We have to get to the bottom of this. We cannot go forward. And meanwhile, we're just going along acting like it's not a big deal. Meanwhile, you have journalists and stuff. Oh, is this really a big deal? Is this really as bad as people are making it out to be? Oh, you're hysterical. Oh, you have Trump derangement syndrome. Every single day, new shit comes out that is just disturbing to its core. To hear how people in power, both in the Trump administration, the intelligence community, the law enforcement community, how much they knew about this, how much they stood down, how much they worked hand in hand with paramilitary groups, including the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the Three Percenters. Oh, it's ugly. My God, it is ugly. And yet, here we are, hanging out on a Sunday night. Cheers. God, it's rough. Oh, it's so rough. Joe, I'm tired of everything. Here we go. Tired of everything being out in the open, reported extensively, and yet our inability to hold info sucks. Are we reduced to having one-on-one convos about this? Okay, I'm glad you asked that. So, a couple things. One, I'm so glad that you phrased it like this, and I'm sure that everybody who's hanging out here can see this, even though, by the way, you're hanging out on a Sunday night listening to some dude out on his porch talk about deep politics. And a lot of you come for a lot of these things. So I don't think that you have the problem of not connecting dots or understand or holding on to information. Americans really do. And I'm not even, and by the way, it's not like it's people are stupid. It's that life happens so fast right now, and there's so much stimulus constantly. People are being worked to death, like literal death. They're being worked to death right now because they're being exploited by a capitalistic corporate system that works them until they drop dead. Meanwhile, it's hard for them to keep track. Otherwise, the people who should know better, I'm talking about journalists, I'm talking about thinkers, I'm talking about the people who should be speaking out about this, they are so hopped up on information, it's incredible. They love it. They love standing in the center of history and just letting it wash over them. I understand it. There's a high that comes with covering politics. Hunter S. Thompson talked about it, about political junkies are actually junkies, and I get that. I thought that I back when I was doing it, I uh, I got it back when I was on the ground, on the scene at these like historic moments. I get that, and I understand it. But America also has a real inherent problem with not understanding context or putting things together in a cohesive narrative. And the reason is because we live in the United States of America that was built on slavery and the genocide of Native people and the exploitation of poor people and women and BIPOC people. That it's really hard to put together, you know, one, two, three, and four when you got to look at that shit and actually start to put together in like a larger sort of a narrative. So we're really bad at doing that, and I have to tell you, it's hurting us. It's really really hurting us. There's hardly a day that goes by where I'm not like, oh my god, there was an attempted coup on January 6th. An attempted coup on January 6th, and people are still getting up and going about their business and pretending like everything's normal. It's crazy. But to go ahead and finish off that question, one-on-one conversations are great. You got to find people you can talk to, and this is important, you got to reach out to people that you know and have meaningful conversations. What we're doing here, and one of the reasons why I do this, is because I want to have conversations that go beyond talking points. There are so many pundits and politicians and writers and reporters, and all they want to do is just traffic talking points. They want to tell you what came out today, and then they want to have a hot take about it that doesn't get into anything deeper. I want to have conversations with people about the larger story, about what has happened and where we are and where we've been and where we are going. There are people in your life, and right now during the pandemic, this is hard because it has to be on like FaceTime, or maybe you're outside having something to eat, or maybe you're on a phone call, maybe you're trading emails. I don't know what you're doing. But there are people in your life, undoubtedly, whether they're friends, colleagues, family members, stuff like that, you have to have bigger conversations with them. It's not enough to just like in a moment like have a conversation and trade talking points because it doesn't do anything. Right? You have to have these larger conversations. Talk about what we're talking about. Talk about the real stuff. Talk about the things that are like actually happening versus like these talking points that don't mean anything. Like cable news is just like this reiteration of a narrative that really doesn't have much to do with what's going on. They don't really drill down further or talk about what has happened or how we've arrived at this point or where we're going. You have to be able to have these conversations with people, and I have to tell you, there are people in your life who will talk about this stuff and they care about this stuff, but they don't they're not tuning into this, right? They're not reading the same books or the same articles or whatever. You got to reach out to those people, and you got to have conversations that are not just red versus blue, Democrat versus Republican. You got to have conversations to go deeper, and I'm trying. And listen, some people won't do it, but maybe there will be one or two, and maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll help because we got to break out of this. We are at a critical juncture. Critical juncture. So there's one-on-one conversations. Those are important. Matthew McDonald. Given the connection between extreme Christianity, white supremacy, and American fascism, can the U.S. survive in its current form, or does substantial change need to happen? No, it cannot survive in this current form. We have reached the end of the line in the current American moment. Um, Question is, what do we do next? And we either come up with a different future with alternatives that are better and more real and human, that involves some sort of a reining in of corporate capitalistic interest, or we let fascists, crack our skulls open to protect capital and capital interest, because that's what they do. That's the thing, by the way, that no one talks about, which is that fascism is the arm and the violence of capitalist interest. Like when things start getting bad and when we start grabbing pitchforks and torches, um, the fascists, are there to break some skulls and put the fear of God into people so they're not going to uprise or they'll kill you. Um, Fascist and capitalist, powerful and wealthy people, they work together. It's like that. So we're either going to have to change things, which would mean pulling back from the American empire, which we need to do. We need to pull the military industrial complex back, which, by the way, just came out that this administration is going to increase the budget to the military. Problematic. Just going to go ahead and leave that out there. So we either have to change one of two ways. We either pull back from the American empire and we start moving towards something that is better for more people and more equal and more free and more human, or this white Christian fascistic movement is going to crack some skulls. I mean, or there's the alternative, which is the future version, which is where, no, the Republican Party doesn't have a platform. They're not a political party. They're a public relations face for capitalistic corporate power. That's it. Yeah, they don't actually have any principles. It's whatever that needs at the moment. They'll be on two sides of the same issue in one day. They don't need actual things. Um, oh yeah, a couple things real fast. Joe Willie, yeah, it fits into it. I mean, you have to look at things through all kinds of different lenses. I think intersectionalism is like one of the more important things. You have to look through gender, race, class, all of it. You gotta go through all of it and bring it all together. And yeah, Moo Young, I did see the intelligence forecast report. We're gonna talk about that on the Buckrake podcast in the next episode. That'll come out on Tuesday, by the way. Um, the intelligence community has told people left and right what is happening. Like they know it. They know it. They worked really, really hard to create a unipolar world where America was completely in charge and was in charge for forever. That didn't work. And now they're trying to tell people that like things are falling apart. I wish people would listen. Drago, what do you honestly think is the motivation behind ostensible Democrats, Manchin, and Sinema refusing to reform or eliminate the filibuster? I'm going to say something, and we're getting near 60 minutes, so I'm going to finish this drink when we get to that, and then I'm going to drink some more because this is important. They're not really Democrats. I don't know how else to put it. We look at everything through people are either Democrats or Republicans, left or right. They're not actually left or right. The Democratic Party got pulled to the right in the late 80s, early 1990s, and they've just continued to go more and more to the right. There was an economic consensus, which was that corporations were important for the economy, free trade was important for the economy, and they intentionally kicked away labor unions and people of color. They said it in so many words. I wrote about it in American Rule. So what has actually happened is that the Democratic Party has such a massive tint at this point that on one side you have some leftist, you have some centrist, and you also have people who would be Republicans in a different world. Joe Manchin does not want to carry out a Democrat agenda. Joe Manchin wants to be a senator, and he wants to maintain the current economic status quo. He has no interest whatsoever in helping with actual reform. So it's not that he necessarily just wants to have power. Like what I would do, and I've talked about this before, I would throw a ton of money at West Virginia. I would give him an offer that he couldn't refuse, just some sort of big pork barrel thing to get him over the line. But people like him and Sinema, they're not actually Democrats. In another world, they would be Republicans. And I keep saying this, and I mean it. People are like, well, why is Pete Buttigieg so good on Fox News? And it's like, because if this was a sane United States of America, Pete Buttigieg would be a leader of the Republican Party. And that's okay. It would be so much better if the Republican Party was like a Pete Buttigieg or a Joe Biden. Even though Joe Biden has moved further left in his presidency than a lot of us expected him to, he was still the architect of mass incarceration and the crime bill, and also protecting banks and credit companies. Like, we have to stop expecting people to act like what we think Democrats are, because the Democratic Party is not what we pretend that it is. It isn't the far left. They're not radicals. They're not socialist. They are, in a lot of cases, center right, center, occasionally center left. But yeah, I would throw a ton of money at Joe Manchin, but he is not interested in forwarding some sort of a progressive, aggressive reform agenda. He just isn't. That's not who he is. That's not what his politics are. That's not what his principles are. So yeah, what I would do is I would throw a ton of money at him, and I would hope that he would come along for the ride. That's old school politics, is what that is. But yeah, one of the things we have to start to realize is that left and right is not left and right. Oh, down here in Georgia, the suppression bills got people pissed off. I was talking about this when it first happened. Like, you either have to make a bet that the suppression is going to work or that people of color are going to out-organize them. You always got to put your money on the latter, because they have been working against suppression and white supremacy since they've been in America. I mean, It's their thing. They know how to do it. They know how to fight it. They are really, really talented at fighting that sort of blatant oppression. But it's got a lot of people pissed off and a lot of people motivated. A lot of people motivated. Yeah. All right, we are close. We still got questions to go, but we are coming right up on 60 minutes where we finish our first drink or whatever drink we got. There's hope here. I got hope about this stuff. We're sitting around talking about this. That's important. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. They're smoking something over there. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Cheers. They're having a good time. They're having a good time next door. I have to say, I miss the music. I miss the jams. That's what I miss. I wish they were still jamming some sexual healing over there. All right, we got some more here. Got a handful of stuff. I've got a bunch of questions left, actually. Thanks for hanging out. It's very cool of you. Okay. Trauma-informed voter, which is a hell of a name, by the way. I got to tell you. Trauma-informed voter. Any observations on televangelists, their media outlets, and universities, how they're impacting local communities across the U.S., creating programs in law and education and counseling? Yeah, I mean, they have controlled the narrative in communities for a long time. I grew up with so much televangelism and grifters in the evangelical community. We would go to church and then we would come home and watch a bunch of televangelists, and it was just so much fear mongering and white supremacist paranoia. I keep saying this, and by the way, like, I'm okay. You ready for this? Here's a little bit of physical comedy as I'm wearing an all-seeing eye on my shirt. So I'm going to make this triangle here with the all-seeing eye. I guarantee the QAnon people are going to love this. This will end up on a QAnon forum. I'm very excited. There is a triangle of white supremacist, fascistic paranoia, right? And I talked about this in the Capitol coup thing. There is a three-sided conspiracy the white supremacy always pushes, which is there are puppet masters, which are either Jewish people, the devil, or both. And then there are liberal traitors on the inside. And then on the other side, there are people of color who don't know any better, and they're being manipulated and used as potential violence. Okay. That's what televangelists have been pushing for years and years and years. And then on top of it, they're like, I've got a message from God. He's going to strike me down if I don't raise X number of dollars by Y day. They've created incredible power bases for themselves. And the fact that they've gone ahead and created these private schools and private universities and private institutions. That's all about getting around federal interference. And that's all about desegregation. They want to get back to the point where they can have white supremacist societies. And I've talked about this. I did a lecture on it. I've written about it, talked about it extensively. Oh, I got blurry. Okay, we're back. They are Confederates. They were Confederates. That's their mindset. They were people who believed that God had created a difference between white people and people of color, and that people of color needed protected, but they were also dangerous and satanic. So that's what they're doing, and that's what they're pushing. It's not actually Christianity. It's a bastardization of the religion that is being used for profit and power. Period. Exactly right. If you play this backwards, there are hidden messages. God, I'm joking about it, but I tell you, there's going to be a video or a web post tomorrow, and it's going to come to my attention. I can't see. This is what happens, and that's why that mindset is there. It's like, Jared, don't wear your all-seeing eye Godspeed You Black Emperor t-shirt. It's gonna send a signal. They're going to hear it loud and clear, and it's going to lead to days and days and days of stuff. And then I went and I did the Illuminati triangle. It's done. Done. I knew it. I knew that's what it was going to be. Knew better. That mindset kept me from a lot of trouble. Blank cannot name. How should we approach the people on the left who seem to believe that concerns over American fascism are overblown and are therefore open to working with the so-called populist on the right? Okay, a couple things there. First and foremost, they are not populist. This is a problem. Trump was not actually a populist. He lost both of his presidential elections with the popular vote. He's actually an unpopulist. Okay? The entire idea that populism is about, talking to poor people is bullshit. Like, that doesn't make you a populist. He's a faux populist, first and foremost. Second, we have to be incredibly careful whenever we say the left or the right. We have to be careful. Again, Joe Manchin's not on the left. A lot of Democrats are not on the left. Leftists understand that fascism is a thing. They understand that fascism can happen and that fascists are prevalent throughout society. That's part of being a leftist. Part of being a leftist is understanding that the right will move into fascism when and if it's necessary and if there is a crisis. You have to know that at all times. So, talking to somebody about there's a fascistic problem is not necessarily about convincing someone on the left. It's about convincing someone who is on the center to move to the left. And one of the reasons why a lot of these people are in the center is because they don't know that there's something further left. That's like, for instance, a lot of people don't know that there's something further left of being a liberal, right? Being a liberal is being either a centrist or a center-left person. There's something further left. You can either be a leftist or a progressive or whatever you want to do. But if you have to convince somebody that fascism is a current threat, they're not actually on the left. They're in the center. And they think that the status quo is completely fine and everything is good. So talk to them about what's going on. Talk to them about the history of fascism. If you talk to people about the actual history of America and the actual history of fascism, it becomes very clear very quickly what's going on in this country. Very, very, very quickly what's going on. Be Kind, Do Good. It's a good name. I like that. Would you talk a little about the book you were writing? For sure. So I am writing a book called The Midnight Kingdom. That is the current title. Titles change. American Rule changed. The original, here's a little bit of trivia. The original title of American Rule was The Rise and Fall of the American Empire. That changed. I forget when that changed, but it changed. So right now this is called The Midnight Kingdom. And what I did was I started with the Roman Empire. And I wanted to see when Christianity and the Roman Empire merged and what that did and how it worked. And I have worked from the Roman Empire and the takeover of Christianity, and I'm moving to this current moment. So Midnight Kingdom comes from a conversation that Steve Bannon and Alexander Dugin had. And Alexander Dugin is a neo-fascist in Russia. He's like one of the ideologues behind Putinism. They have been comparing notes and organizing for a neo-fascistic rise in the international sphere. And Dugin talks about considering Western civilization to be a midnight kingdom, meaning that it's almost done. It's almost ready to fall, and this current order is going to fall, and they are going to get to decide what comes next. So it comes from an Alexander Dugin quote. But so what I am following is I'm following the changes in power and in control and reality. And what I found is that our history is about fights between three groups of people. One group of people are the church or religious leaders. You could just say the church as a totality, or the faith, or whatever you want to call it, or revelatory knowledge, or people who have that sort of an idea. The next are politicians, or people who are trying to curry favor in order to gain advantage. And the third are capitalists or business people who are trying to use profit and power and privilege. And basically, history can kind of be divided based on who has control at what time. And sometimes you're here, and moving around. So I'm charting the ideas of politics and power and how oppression has been used and how conspiracy theories have been used all the way around in order to move us forward. I'm currently in 1797, and I am finding crazy shit. Today was a really, really crazy day of research. It was like one of those eureka moments. And I have them every now and then, with my stuff. Like with American Rule, I probably had about 10 of those moments over the course of writing that book. I've already had probably 10 of them, and I'm on chapter 4. of writing Midnight Kingdom. So, but yeah, that's the project right now. I am learning more than I ever thought I would learn. I feel like I have grown exponentially and gained so much more knowledge and an idea of what's going on. It's taken a while. Okay, Janelle Forsyth, do you think Trump will resume having his political rallies? And a fun one. What's the first thing you look forward to doing once you're fully vaccinated? I'll say this about Trump, by the way, just to have a quick little talk about him. I think he's really enjoying this thing that he's got at Mar-a-Lago. I think he really enjoys coming into like a ballroom while somebody is having a wedding and talking about how, how he got screwed by Biden and how terrible Biden is. Everyone claps and poses for pictures. I talked about this before. Being an ex-president is kind of the ideal job for him. He gets to talk about politics, but he doesn't actually have to work, and he gets all the adoration and worship. I don't know if he's going to have rallies. I think he really enjoys what he has. Like, I think he'll pop up every now and then and do this stuff. But I think what we're looking at right now is that Trump is going to basically, over the next couple of years, have a bunch of people court his favor and approval because he loves that. He loves having powerful and wealthy people come to him and kiss his feet and, beg for his approval. So I think one of the things that we're going to watch over the past couple of years or over the next couple of years is that Trump is going to have a bunch of Republican hopefuls come and basically kiss the ring. And that is going to be one of those situations where he'll decide who follows him up, and he'll be a kingmaker. I think that's where this thing is going. That being said, I wouldn't doubt that he would have a rally or two. I mean, he loves it, absolutely loves it. Lee Hale, did you watch the HBO QAnon docuseries? Thoughts? Do you think Trump was in on QAnon? Well, first and foremost, I don't think Trump has a clue what QAnon actually is. I think what happened with Trump was he had people around him who were really tuned in to alt-right movements. I think that he had people around him who paid attention to QAnon and fed him stuff about QAnon and told him to say things that would give QAnon credence and power and influence. I did watch the documentary series. I thought it was really good. But it was really good because it gave us a peek at the QAnon subculture. And the QAnon subculture is really weird, particularly the people who are probably running QAnon right now. Jim and Ron Watkins, who are a couple of unsavory characters, is what I would say. I think the interesting thing about QAnon is how powerful people used this thing that was obviously fraudulent and bullshit, and they used it for their own means. And I think it really gave us a front row view of what modern political and societal movements can be just completely overtaken by completely unfounded hearsay and bullshit. I thought it was really, really fascinating. It's worth watching. Juxtaposed GOP. How do you manage teaching, writing books, writing on your blog and other articles, podcasts, live streams, doom scrolling, keeping your dog from eating your furniture? No kidding. My little dog, Betsy. Here, I'll show you a picture of Betsy. I love showing a picture of Betsy every now and then. I did this the other day. She's a little cartoon dog. Look at that. Look at that thing. That's unfair. You shouldn't have to live a life where you have that thing around. Terrible. She's been chewing on what do you call it? It's at the bottom of a wall. It's a little bit of plaster down at the bottom of the wall. Trim. She's been chewing on the trim. It's crazy. Anyway, how do I do all that? Well, so one thing, talking to my therapist, is that being really busy makes me feel like I'm in control. I work harder than a lot of other people. I don't like not working. I'm not good with free time. Like, I like to be busy. I like to learn. I get really, really excited researching and learning. And that's actually, like, that's a side effect of trauma, of having like an abused childhood and a dysfunctional sort of a childhood. It makes me feel like I'm in control. That's a good thing for me. The other thing is that I grew up in like a really poor household, like a factory working laborer household, my main job is thinking. My main job is teaching and researching and writing. If I can't like clock in and do the work and work harder than other people who are sitting in a chair and doing research and typing, I feel like I'm failing somehow. I'll outwork people. That's been one of the things. Like I'm like it's like running a race. I'm not faster than other people, but I'll outrun them. I will run more than they will, and I'm proud of that. But yeah, and the other part about it is that I just enjoy it. I just enjoy it. I really enjoy figuring this shit out. Understanding how politics actually works and how history has actually worked and how these situations actually work, again, it makes me feel like I have control. Learning about it, and I understand for some people, like hearing all this stuff, maybe it feels overwhelming, and maybe like it's scary and it makes them feel like there's so many movements against them and so much weight and all of that against them. For me, it makes me feel like, oh, I understand this, so here's something that I can do about it. And what I can do about it is I can spread the word of the thing that I'm starting to understand. And for those of you who have followed me for years now, and by the way, thank you. Cheers if you have. That's awesome if you do that. I've learned more. There's such a huge difference between who I was back in 2016 when I was sneaking into Trump rallies and who I am now. The understanding that I've gotten from piecing this stuff together and doing research, and I'm so excited about it because I'll find it and I'm like, holy shit, this explains this or that explains that. That keeps me going. Like, I am so excited to get up tomorrow morning with my coffee. And tomorrow I got to learn about George Washington in 1794 telling Congress that he's afraid about secret societies in the United States of America. I'm pumped about that. Like, I'm really, really excited. Which, by the way, is all about the Illuminati, which figures into the election of 1800. And I'm pumped as shit about that stuff. Like, I was sitting there reading today, like, pamphlets from 1790. Oh, hell. I think it's 1791. There were these pamphlets about how the Enlightenment people were coming to destroy Christianity and ruin cultures. Sound familiar? Yeah, so I enjoy it. That's how I do it. That's how I do it. And I feel like if I don't do it, somebody won't do it. So I need to do it. Anyway, thanks for hanging out. No more war. You mentioned on the podcast the difference between the buttoned-up GOP and the modern group. Could you talk more about that? Yeah, the joke I made on the podcast was that there's a massive difference between the old GOP, who were a bunch of like buttoned-up waspy dudes, like George H.W. Bush, who might have like a gin and tonic, and then like the way that they unwound at night was by like overthrowing a democratic government in South America. Now it's just like this Trumpian pleasures of the flesh group of people. It's just the most depraved, degenerate, but also really tragic people. I have to say, and I know that people don't always appreciate this, but I think it's important to point out, the modern right is really unwell. Like, they have gone through some trauma. It's like I talked about Trump Jr., and I know we all hate him and he sucks. But it's like Trump Jr. never stood a chance. Like, when you look in his eyes, there's something not right, not well. And I've heard stories from people who grew up with Trump Jr. and knew Trump Jr. and have covered Trump Jr. And they're like, this guy is really, really not well. And so if you actually look at the right, you look at them and you're like, oh my God, you're chasing something. And in the day, those buttoned up H.W. Bush wasps, what they were about was just straight power. They were just about, okay, well, I'll sleep easy tonight if I take over this South American country and then I set up the domino to take over this Southeast Asia situation. And they were so interested in building power, that's where they got off. The modern GOP is about the pleasures of the flesh, but also about profit. And it is they're degenerating. It's really, really bad. And by the way, it doesn't make H.W. Bush and the rest of them any better because they were power freaks. And they did so much damage and they hurt so many different types of people. It's just a different type of expression. Paul, in American Rule, and on here you talk about how there was not actually a winner in the Cold War. What does that mean historically and presently? Yeah, nobody wins a Cold War. The Cold War really poisoned America. Like, it made it to where hypercapitalism was the only possible answer. It made us cannibalize our labor unions. It made us exploit our workers worse. It made us crack down on women, people of color, LGBTQ Americans. It made us hurt ourselves. And on top of that, our post World War II behavior was despotic. We brought over Nazis to work with us. We brought over these just absolutely horrid human beings who had experimented on fellow Japanese people in order to like bolster our weapons programs and medicine. It's awful. And then on top of it, we would pretend like we were all about democracy and liberty and equality in the American way, and then we would just prop up dictators around the world to exploit their people and oppress their people as long as they, worked with our corporations. We didn't win the Cold War. We both lost the Cold War. It just so happens that Russia lost first. It's almost like, we had a big giant brawl and Russia dropped dead, and we've been walking around bleeding internally. Yeah, we didn't win the Cold War. It really, really fucked us up in a big bad way. George Heibel, will we again have normal relationships with our former ally countries? Um, kind of. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a sec, Lee, for sure. Um, yeah, that'll be after this one. Thank you for asking that. We'll go back to our allies, but I also think a message was sent to our allies with Trump, which was, how could you ever trust us? Like, our deals and our treaties are only as good as our next presidential election. So there could always be a Trump around the corner. We displayed to the rest of the world that we're not worth the trust. And by the way, we were worth the trust for a while. We screwed over our friends left and right. But we're reaching a point where, particularly, we're going to have to make a choice about dismantling the empire and the American hegemony project. And when we do that, we're going to have to start relying on allies. We're going to have to build new coalitions and new relationships. Lee asked if I would talk about the anti-trans bill. Yeah, there's a couple of things going on. First of all, it's a matter of a culture war. It's about it's about bullying, is what it is. It's about showing that you're not afraid to hurt vulnerable people in order to score cheap political points with white evangelicals and ignorant assholes. That's first and foremost. Is it's a cultural signal. It doesn't do anything for society. It doesn't push any actual ideology. The second thing, and this is really, really important, and I can't remember if I talked about this on the Muckrake podcast or not. I think I did on the Weekender, I think, episode, the last one. In feminist theory, there is the idea that the moment that gender is discovered to be a malleable thing, that's when the patriarchy is in trouble. It's when all of a sudden we start to understand that gender is not biological and that people can be different. And that ends the constraints of patriarchy. And so when patriarchy, it becomes readily apparent that we're not all stuck in these jail cells and we don't all have to conform to some sort of unrealistic expectation. When that happens, all of a sudden the entire project of patriarchy starts to fall apart because it's very brittle. It's very brittle, which is one of the reasons why it is such, it is constantly reinforced through violence, oppression, and abuse. It's very brittle. And when you even think about it for a second, it starts to fall apart. So they want to reinforce patriarchal conditions. And by the way, that both happens consciously and unconsciously. But it was a matter of scoring a cultural political victory, and absolutely disgusting. And it's about control. It 100% is about control, and it's as repellent as anything. All right, I got 4 more. Michelle, have you read Surveillance Capitalism? I think what you said about social media is capturing the public sphere fits nicely with it. Surveillance Capitalism is a really good book. Really good book. That's a rough one. It's a long book, and it is there's a lot of information to process in that thing. But Surveillance Capitalism is really, really good, and it details how the internet has been taken over by capitalism. So we are exploited constantly, both in terms of targeted advertisement and targeted consumerism, but also in that we are creating content and products for these people, but we think that things are free, right? We don't have to pay for Twitter, we don't have to pay for Facebook, but meanwhile we're giving them all of our data, and we're constantly giving them A/B testing, product testing, focus group testing, and we're giving them unbelievable amounts of information about the human brain that we don't even understand, which is a whole different subject that we could talk about for an entire bourbon talk. But what I was talking about with social media is that social media has taken over the public sphere, where we used to go in terms of talking, comparing notes, making plans, gaining solidarity, class consciousness, that type of stuff. And social media has taken that over. And what it does is it controls our discourse. It can turn a button and suddenly you're amplified. They can turn a button the other way and suddenly you're taken out of the context and the algorithm. They can tell you what to talk about. Trending subjects train you to talk about things that are very popular, and most of them are products. Most of them fall along a corporate ethos. So what has actually happened is that corporations have captured the public sphere, which makes reform or change really hard to do. I keep telling everyone, people need to realize that social media is a product and an artificial reality, and a corporate artificial reality. You have to treat it as such. It's a really dangerous thing. Progress or backwards? I have some Willets and Widow Janes. Hey, cheers. But no question. And then ask the question. Maybe something about the persistence and historical examples of this contrived excuse for white supremacy and segregation. This is an important thing. This is a really, really important thing. And Olivia, I'll answer that in a second. That'll be next. So white supremacy isn't exactly what it's been sold to as everybody. So white supremacy has been sold to everybody as if it is like an outright expressed hatred of people of color, and it can certainly be that. But another facet of it is this paternal idea towards people of color, which is, well, just genetically and biologically, they are lesser human beings. They can't make decisions for themselves. They can't possibly handle democracy and government and politics, which is total bullshit, because they've shown an incredible acumen for that over and over and over again, despite just incredible barriers being put up against them. But there's this paternalism, which, by the way, is one of the backbones of Southern slavery and white supremacy, which is, well, we love our slaves. We take care of them. We make sure to take care of them, and they're really lucky to have us. Segregation, though, is about understanding for these people. It's a belief among these people that, oh, it's bad for them to be around us because they're not at our level. And how could they be expected to? They should be over here. They should have their own thing. They should never have to mix with us because it would feel terrible for them. And so in that way, their actual oppression and their racism and their white supremacy is actually laundered through the idea of care. There's a whole lot of white supremacy that is laundered through the idea of care. Okay, Olivia says, do you have advice on how we can help avoid genocidal violence? First and foremost, we have to talk about genocidal violence. We have to talk about where it comes from, how it works, past instances of it, what history shows us about it, and we have to stop pretending that it's not a possibility. We're in a perfect situation where we could possibly see genocidal violence. It's all about the other. It's all. My neighbor is okay. They're having a party. They're having a pretty okay time, I think. I think they've imbibed a few substances. Jack Burden, I have to listen on Monday morning. Hey, hope you're having a good Monday. Hearing this afterwards, and I miss hanging out. I miss you too, Jack. I'd love to hear a thought on Gates in Florida. That scandal has grown into something bigger than Gates. I think a lot of Florida Republicans are probably scared where this might lead and where it maybe should be. Yeah, there was a systematic corruption there, a systematic exploitation, a systematic activity of child trafficking. From my understanding, we're about 20% into the stories that are going to come out about Gates. It's really bad. Really, really bad. All right, last one. Groggy Bones. Hi, Jared. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Cheers. Cheers to you. I don't know. I used to try and I got that stat from people working on the story. Is where I got that stat. I've been talking to some of the reporters who are working the Gates beat. And a lot of people have known about this for a very long time. They've just been waiting for when things might fall into place, or when like certain people want to go on the record, or when investigations are coming out. So we're about 20% in on this story, which I think is going to get larger and larger. Not that I've been talking about this on the Muckrake podcast, although it would probably be good to go ahead and become a patron. I think we have a good community anyway. So where am I going to be in 5 years? I used to try and plan out the years very, very hard, because I was very much into control. I'm working on 5 days at a time now, maybe 5 months at a time. I just want to keep getting better. I just want to keep learning and keep trying to be a better person. I'm working really hard on myself right now through therapy and healing from trauma, and trying to center myself and trying to really focus on empathy and recognizing the humanity in other people, and trying to educate, build communities, and build links. That's what I'm trying. It's really, really hard to heal, and really, really hard to be a good person, and I'm trying. So I hope that in 5 years I will be better, healthier, smarter, and hopefully part of a good community of people and making a difference. That's what I hope. So, all right. So we're going to finish up for tonight. We're going to come back. I like Bullet 10-year bourbon. I actually haven't had 12, but I like 10. I actually have a bottle of 10 in there right now. Really, really good stuff. I just want to say again, thank you as always for hanging out. Y'all are awesome. I get very excited about these things. I get very, very excited about coming out and doing these bourbon talks. And, things can get tough and hard, and like learning about this stuff and studying this stuff and talking about this stuff while also trying to make myself a better person and make my community better. It's hard. And like getting to come on here and be with like a couple of hundred people, how fucking cool is that? And before it's all over, like a couple of thousand people watch it. Like, that's awesome. I feel so privileged and lucky and just humbled. So thank you for caring what I have to say and engaging in the conversation and being good to one another. I see everyone being kind. That's always nice, as opposed to seeing people just fight after each other. This is wonderful. Muckrake Podcast will have its regular episode on Tuesday. We're going to talk about that intelligence report, which I think is really, really important. We'll have a weekender episode on Friday. If you haven't become a patron, that's over at patreon.com/muckrakepodcast. Also, my Substack, jaredyatessexton.substack.com. I really appreciate all the support and the kindness over there. Subscribers help me. I'm trying really, really hard to just be an independent person. I don't want to deal necessarily with editors or editorial oversight. People don't always want to have these conversations. And I want to have these conversations. I want to talk about real stuff, and also not have to talk status quo bullshit. I don't want to do that. Conservative comedy can't work because it's angry and it's punching down. It's bullying. Conservative comedy doesn't work because it's bullying. Anyway, you mean so much to me. Thank you so much. Cheers. Let's try and have as much fun as these people are having. Yeah. Let's have a good week, and we'll be back. I might do a live stream here or there, and we'll talk. Thank you, everybody. Be good. Be safe. Love y'all.